Less than 2 weeks after America's missile strike in Baghdad that killed Iranian Quds Force Chief Qasem Soleimani and the subsequent standoff between Iran and the United States, Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif lands in Delhi today. Over the next 3 days, Zarif will meet Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Foreign Minister Jaishankar, and attend the Government of India's annual Foreign Policy and Strategic Affairs Summit. Joining us to talk about how India's foreign policy objectives are affected by the recent tensions in West Asia is India's former ambassador to Iran KC Singh, who also served as Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. Ambassador Singh has written two extensive and incisive op-eds on BloombergQuint this week and last week that I'd urge you to read to get a better understanding of the many forces at play in this moment in Iran. Ambassador Singh, could you begin with first describing how relations between India and Iran have shifted in the last decade and a half between your time in the embassy in Tehran in the mid-2000s to now?
Look, the high point and the closest convergence between India and Iran was as Taliban was rising in Afghanistan, which is late 1990s. Thus, it's not a coincidence that many of our senior military intelligence officials had close contact with General Soleimani, because he was fronting for Iran for the support we were giving the Northern Alliance till the fall of Taliban in 2001. Now, therefore, following 2001, Prime Minister Vajpayee went to Tehran. Then President Khatami came to India. In fact, he was the chief guest at the Republic Day, and we had two declarations. We had the Tehran Declaration, I think 2001, and 2003 was the New Delhi Declaration, which laid the roadmap for close strategic engagement between the two countries. But then strategic engagement can't be in a vacuum. There was a larger context, and that context started breaking down in 2003 when the clandestine nuclear enrichment program of Iran got uncovered, when Colonel Gaddafi, the then ruler of Libya, came out from the cold and conceded that he had been getting help from A.Q. Khan of Pakistan for his clandestine program. And then the Iranians very quickly, when I arrived in Tehran in 2003 September, they quickly came to the negotiating table and started giving out details of what their program was, and they suspended the program. Now, this was coincidentally happening as India was engaging the U.S. to actually have a nuclear deal, which began with Vajpayee, and then Manmohan Singh government carried it forward. So U.S. was able to use this, the nuclear issue, both to pillory and isolate Iran and at the same time engage India. And that then naturally created dissonance between India and Iran, because in the Iranian mind, they felt they were signatories of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They felt they had done nothing wrong. They, of course, ignored the fact that they had a clandestine program assisted by A.Q. Khan, and that India was not even a signatory. And yet, U.S. was beginning to engage India and probably reward India by creating a kind of an out from the NPT, where despite not signing the NPT, we were on the road to get a nuclear waiver, which would allow India to engage in normal nuclear commerce. And that problem has continued, and that is why Prime Minister Manmohan Singh made hardly one odd visit, whereas earlier it was ordained that there will be annual exchange of visits at the head of government, head of state level. That never happened post-2003, post-2005, in fact. And that actually has been the tilt which in the Iranian mind India had towards US. Got more exacerbated with the coming of Prime Minister Modi, because he engaged UAE and Saudi Arabia, the crown princes of both the countries, more closely, more personally, and therefore in the Iranian mind now, India is seen as somehow involved with the US, Saudi, UAE axis. Even if we are not openly supporting them, but India is not seen by Iran any longer as neutral as it really wasn't from about 2005.
I want to expand on that. One thing I looked up which showed that around that time in the mid-2000s, the Iranian public saw India as a friend. That's around where you said things started to shift. So in the Iranian establishment, the IRGC, the supreme leader and its people Are other countries viewed through the prisms primarily of those who support or don't support our nuclear program? America as the traditional foe after the 79 revolution, and then more in the near region, who's aligned with us and against us as against the rest of the Arab world? And does India get put into each of those boxes, right now unfavorable to Iran, because of how it's made each of those strategic choices on its own?
Look, we were in that box, which was kind of, where Iran still wanted to engage us, and that's why India continued to buy oil. But what worsened the problem, two things happened. One was that President Obama, realizing that ISIS, they did not want another war, and ISIS could not be rolled back without the assistance of Iran, he did a strategic shift in the Gulf. And that is something that UAE and Saudi Arabia were very, very unhappy with, because they realized the 2015 nuclear deal which was given to Iran by the 5 permanent members and Germany, they signed it, what is called a JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Program of Action, that this was not only about the nuclear program, not only lifting the sanctions, beginning of the lifting of sanctions on Iran, but also unleashing Iran, where Iran was then able to use a Shia majority Iraq, a beleaguered Shia government in Syria, and its Shia proxies and friends like Hezbollah in Lebanon. It was able to use these, create militias, and that was General Soleimani's contribution, and they did roll back ISIS, did eliminate it from northern Iraq, did almost eliminate it from Syria, and restored the power and control of the Assad government in Syria. But now what's happened is, when President Trump comes in, he comes in by openly saying what Saudi Arabia and UAE wanted, that the nuclear deal was bad, Iran is a terrorist country, Iran's influence in West Asia needs to be rolled back. Now that there is no ISIS, US does not need them. So essentially what US was saying was, I'm sorry, we don't want you to stay in these areas, you've done what you did, but that phase is over, and therefore now we want 3 things from you. A new nuclear deal, we want your missile program controlled, and we want you to go home, not influence the government in Iraq, the government in Syria. Therefore, what is called the Shia Crescent, roll back your influence in the Shia Crescent. The whole fight is about that.
I want to get to that region in just a bit. Before that, since on that timeline, did some of that mistrust also build in, because perceptibly and visually, Prime Minister Modi would come across as more friendly with Benjamin Netanyahu than even President Obama was. So is that Iran's antipathy to not even recognizing Israel as state and seeing India pally with the Israeli Prime Minister, did that also build in some distance?
Well, Israel, yes, has been perceived by the Iranian regime as a permanent foe. They've known we've had diplomatic relations with them, so taking it a notch higher and holding hands on a beach and standing in the incoming waves probably optically raised the level of that. But essentially, Iran knew that we have the relationship with Israel. We had been buying arms for them for 2 decades. The diplomatic relations were established back in 91 by Narasimha Rao, so it was nothing new. But I think what altered was the chumminess shown by his personal engagement of Mohammed bin Zayed in Abu Dhabi and Mohammed bin Salman in Riyadh, and those countries also played the cards from their point of view to send visible signals of warmness by granting the highest awards, conferring the highest awards on Prime Minister, by saying we are giving land for a temple in Abu Dhabi, etc., which actually helped him electorally, helped him just before the elections build up his persona. So the engagement went beyond normal diplomatic engagement or normal convergence. And this would have been read in Tehran as Tehran had sanctions, and we had stopped really lowered a buying of oil from that. And because the old approach used to be, we used to tell US, we will abide by all UN sanctions, all multilateral sanctions, but your unilateral sanctions, we are sorry, we are not going to abide by. Now, I think that hesitation was lifted when this axis of US, that is Trump and the 2 Mohammeds, India was seen as much closely aligned with them in terms of listening to what they were saying. Even though we kept talking to Tehran, we'll be talking this weekend, but Iranians know it in terms of their perception. They're really working with China and Russia, but they would see India, they would like to reel India in, but they realize that it's one country which has moved away.
2 points on that. First, the commercial pressures that play when all of this was happening. Leaving aside the strategic bit, to those who say that that believe that India has been too agreeable to Washington's wishes when it comes to the commercial engagement with Iran, was there any other choice? Because so much of this last decade was defined by first the Obama era primary sanctions, then those being relaxed as the nuclear deal was firmed up, only for the threat of secondary sanctions for those whoever Iran transacts with by the Trump administration, causing a further drawdown in economic ties. Was there any other way India could have handled this?
You see, we have two problems in terms of trade. Firstly, our trade is imbalanced. We buy a lot more from Iran in terms of oil, and we are not able to export as much. Whereas with China, it's a very balanced trade. The bouquet of products they can send to Iran is much wider. They have a land connection. They even have a railway connection now coming through Central Asia. So they can defy the sanctions, and they've got entities arm's length away which only deal with Iran. Even if US sanctions them, it doesn't affect them. They are not companies which are dealing with US. And because the trade is balanced, it becomes literally barter. And they're also trying to move it to their own currency and move it away from the dollar area. EU also tried with that, setting up some kind of an instrument in EU where you could trade through it without using the dollar, but that never really took off. Whereas India, the problem is that we build up a surplus here which we cannot pay to Iran because of products. The range of products that we can sell to Iran is limited, and in any case you are competing against China in that market. So all the space which Japan and India vacate, or the European countries vacate, is taken up by China.
On that point about China, how much of these lower level of economic relations affect some strategic objectives? Projects like the Shabar port, was that at any point, is that a misconception to think that that could have served as a counterbalance to the CPEC at all with the Gwadar port and the economic corridor that China was building through Pakistan, or that was just one port that India was wishing to help with and it couldn't have counterbalanced the China-Pakistan access at all?
No, let's not say Pakistan, China, because Chinese are coming through Central Asia also.
True,
and
with the
Gwadar is
BRI.
only one of those.
Yes.
And the Iranians also, and the Iranians also, they have said we don't mind selling gas to the Pakistanis and the Chinese. It can go alongside the CPEC. So they also throw this dice down. But the geostrategic context has changed in the area. It is not Iran of the 90s or the early 2000s. It's a different Iran. It has channels open to the Taliban. It's got the Chinese to deal with. Therefore, India becomes just one of the countries it can deal with, and therefore it competes with UAE and Saudis for India's interest or India's attention. But they realize that other than exporting oil and gas, India is marginal to their economy.
The global implications of what's happened in the last 2 weeks, Ambassador Singh, much of what you read and much of what we tend to hear, without saying so, it seems like the world and the implications of a further military conflict in the region falls down to what is increasingly becoming two blocks. Those that are overtly or covertly aligned with the United States, that is the rest of the Sunni Arab world as well, to an extent. The fact that there are conversations that are now obviously underway even between Israel and Saudi Arabia on one side, and you have Russia and China trying to extend their influence into Asia. This may not be the 1960s to the 1990s anymore, but this is as close as we've gotten to two different blocks in a less high octave Cold War that has global implications of any conflict that might arise.
Look, I don't think even Saudis and the Emiratis are overly keen to have a confrontation with Iran, and therefore they would have been concerned. Their reports that they had their own back channels working and talking to Tehran. They didn't want escalation in the area. Now the trouble in aligning with someone like US President Donald Trump is that he can be very unpredictable, and he will take decisions not after consulting his allies, certainly not after consulting Abu Dhabi and Riyadh, but he will take decisions. And his Democrats, his own opposition in the U.S. is criticizing him. And this morning he's again given a statement where he's shifted yet again from the argument made that they killed Soleimani. He sanctioned the killing of Soleimani because U.S. embassies were going to be attacked. Other people are saying we've heard nothing of that kind from the intelligence, U.S. intelligence, including Democrats who have been briefed. And today he's changed the statement himself. He says maybe the embassies are going to be attacked, maybe they were not going to be attacked. So the real reason is he just basically is strategically opposed to Iran. He's been tweeting in Farsi, he's been sending out signals. So they've gone to what is called maximum pressure has been made more maximum. Sanctions have been heightened, and therefore this tension will persist because US really doesn't have dependence on Gulf oil any longer. It suits US. If the price of oil goes up, it does not harm US. I'm not saying they're doing it because of this, but there is a strategic reason. They want to roll back the influence of Iran. But if the price of oil spikes, that is no longer a negative for US. It is not going to restrain US. And therefore, it's a very complex thing, and this is only because of internal disturbances in Iran. US may be tempted to continue on the same road rather than engaging Iran, which may be risky because many times before, US and the others have wished and hoped that the regime was about to be overthrown. Ultimately, Iranians tend to rally behind their government. This may also pass. We don't know. We don't know the full extent of the disturbance. But US seems to be assessing that by tightening the screws, this will lead to the overthrow of the government, which may or may not happen, probably will not happen. But it definitely increases the chances of Iranian Revolutionary Guards, IRGC, taking real revenge, because what we saw then, what we've seen in the missile strikes, was more of a symbolic attack back on US, because no US lives were lost. But if this tension continues, one wrong move by either side can cause a situation which will affect India very, very seriously.
According to you, are those likely to happen via overt and formal military force routes as Ayatollah Khamenei had asked for? Or will it revert to a non-state actor proxy battle, which is what Iran's been better at for many years, as you said, via Hezbollah and other actors, and being able to get other regions, other places attacked, not formally engaging its own military? Will this play out in a different way than as it has in the recent past?
It's difficult to judge, difficult to see how risk-prone IRGC gets, how much of a control the Supreme Leader has over them. So as the tension mounts, as the tension internally mounts, which major actor plays what role may be very difficult to determine at this stage. Traditionally, yes, they have preferred to launch major attacks on US troops indirectly, not directly. But then this time US has killed their general directly. So we don't know what choices they make, but wisdom dictates that the two sides talk to each other indirectly, if not directly, and the tension is tempered so that the chance of a mishap which triggers off a wider conflict is diminished, if not eliminated.
Okay. My final question then, in a world that is so unpredictable in that case, in so many of these equations with Iran, with America in a way, India is having to establish nimble transactional relationships with other countries. In such a mix and in such a setting, how do you lay out what a country's strategic objectives are? What would those be?
Traditionally, the strategic objectives remain constant. Strategic tactics change. Strategic objectives are that you don't want to be drawn into a conflict. You want trade lanes open. You want commerce and trade to remain open. You want the diaspora safe. You want oil and gas prices not to spike and your markets to remain open. At the same time, you don't want to be drawn into a conflict. So these have always been the strategic objectives. That's why leaders starting with Narasimha Rao even earlier continued the same policy of essentially balancing between these groups, which was kind of neo non-alignment, a new kind of non-alignment, even when non-alignment was no longer common. But your strategic interests were safeguarded by balancing your interests. But if you're perceived as tilting too much in one direction, then it becomes difficult to influence the situation or to play a go-between, which is the kind of situation we're finding ourselves in at the moment.
There is a perceived tilt that is obvious to the rest of the players on the global landscape, that there is a tilt towards America that others perceive as obvious, you say.
Right.
All right. On that note, Ambassador Singh, thank you so much for making time to explain what seems to be a tenuous and complex situation in West Asia and what it means for the rest of the region and other players involved, be that across the Atlantic Ocean. Ambassador Singh, thank you very much for making time for BloombergQuint and its viewers.